High temperatures can prove deadly for outdoor workers, but there are no standards or laws protecting them. Now, a coalition of workers, community leaders and activists in Florida are trying to change that. Nitsa Soledad Perez reports.
A group of outdoor workers, including construction, garden and farm workers, rallied in downtown Miami to urge the local government to pass a law requiring businesses to protect employees from the heat. Some cover their bodies with white sheets to represent those who die from heat-related illness, an average of 39 workers across the U.S. each year. Many experts, however, believe the numbers significantly underestimate the severity of the problem. Lucia Kie has been working in Florida for 17 years as a farm worker. She has experienced heat illness on the job.
What employers want is for us to pick the harvest fast, but what they don't know is what's happening inside of us. We get kidney disease. We suffer horrible things out there and during the sun, and it's unbearable most of the time. We are dying because of the heat, the stress.
These workers are asking for basic measures.
We want water, shade, and rest for all the workers that spend their days outside.
Among the provisions in the proposed legislation, the right for workers to take a paid 10-minute break to drink water and rest in the shade every 2 hours if the heat index rises above 32 degrees Celsius. Activists, union leaders, and medical professionals show their support.
Workers are at risk for injury and death. With more than 6,000 emergency department visits in Florida each year, as healthcare workers and doctors, we do our best to care for our communities, and we rely on public health measures to keep our communities healthy and out of the hospital. I'm proud to stand here today with my comrades advocating that heat standards be implemented in Miami-Dade County.
Workers are asking for action at the county level, since there are no laws at the federal level that protect them from the scorching sun.
The OSHA, our federal government that monitors occupational safety and hazard, does not have heat protection guidelines. The Biden administration has ordered for those to be developed, but it could take a decade before those come down.
At the state level, a bipartisan push for employers in Florida to meet even basic heat safety standards has failed for the last 3 consecutive years. Other states, including California, Minnesota, and Washington, have successfully enacted heat standard laws detailing workers' protections and penalties if employers don't comply. But businesses in Florida say they will cost too much money, and the bill has stalled in the state legislature. Workers' only hope, while they wait for federal action, is to gain some kind of traction at the local level. Nitsa Soledad Perez, CGTN, Miami.
To what extent then does extreme heat affect economic productivity? For more on that, I'm joined by Hans Despain. He's a professor of economics at Nichols College of Dudley, Massachusetts. Hans, great to have you on the show. Thanks for joining us. So what are the industries that are most affected by extreme heat, and are there laws that protect them from the elements?
Well, obviously, as your lead-in story just showed, it's primarily anybody that works outdoors, such as agricultural workers and construction. But we also need to remember that there are millions, in fact, tens of millions of workers that work inside without air conditioning here in the United States. So we're talking about tens of millions of workers. Those industries inside warehouses, transportation, factories, service, even restaurants that are directly affected.
So we're talking big losses here, recent reports show, and if annual worker productivity losses are likely to be in their tens of billions of dollars globally, what resources will cities need to pursue in terms of climate adaptation and resilience measures?
Well, first of all, Sally, I think it's, even here in the U.S., the estimate from economists in a normal year is between $100 and $150 billion during those 5 to 10 days of extreme heat throughout the country. But this is an abnormally hot year. So I would expect those costs would be around $200 to $250 billion. So it's a very significant number, whereby this year we could expect a decrease in economic growth of between 0.5% and 1% just from this extreme heat. So the costs are extremely high. We don't have laws that protect. Again, as your story said at the beginning, the Biden administration is working on it, but it might be a significant number of years. Your story said a decade away. I think that's accurate. So we need significant legislation that's passed, as the workers, the agricultural workers that you showed, were asking for. The folks in your story were asking for very simple things. I think we would need to have even more aggressive things with the extent of the extreme heat that we're experiencing from climate change.
So what kind of things would you suggest then, or would you imagine in this kind of scenario? And, you know, given that extreme heat isn't necessarily new, especially in places like Arizona, what's driving the demand now?
Yeah, you've got to allow workers not to work. So so many of the workers, the more responsible companies that don't have air conditioning or have workers working outside, tell them not to come in. The problem is that these workers cannot pay their bills. So we would need some legislation that would guarantee their pay. And a lot of these businesses, farmers, can't afford to pay workers that don't come in. So at a federal level, that we would need some sort of compensation for that lost pay. For example, most of our cities can't afford it, and our cities and municipalities and states are prohibited from going into debt. So I think the legislation has to come from a federal level. And yeah.
And, you know, I suppose in some ways it's not just down to the individual worker, but it's also down to the infrastructure of the cities in which they're working. I mean, researchers projected that by 2050, more than 970 cities would experience average summertime high temperatures of 95 degrees Fahrenheit compared to 354 cities today. So how will different cities be impacted by heat? So, you know, we might have Dhaka compared to London, London being obviously a Western developed city, but its infrastructure, its rail network system, for example, wouldn't be used to extreme heat. So how do you have to take that into consideration when you're looking at legislation?
Well, you bring up an excellent point. And there's an important study that came out of Dartmouth College here in the U.S. in New Hampshire, and it was published in Science Advances, and just last year. And what they show is there is a massive difference between who's impacted most. Everybody's hurt by the extreme heat. There's very, very few cities, some in the far north, that the heat increase, because it's a very cold climate, actually can be beneficial. But those are very rare. Most areas are damaged, but it's especially along the equator, a little north, a little south. So Africa, Middle East, South Pacific, all of Central America, most of South America, Australia, these are the areas that are directly affected. And unfortunately, the biggest emitters of carbon into the atmosphere are the global north, United States and in Europe. China would be included and also affected in a negative, severe negative way. So you need some sort of global activity. The researchers from Dartmouth have a second paper. They put dollar amounts, and their purpose of this second paper was to hopefully allow some evidence for legal liability claims from countries that are hurt the most: Bangladesh, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Syria, the Sudan, many countries in Africa.
And I suppose putting a price tag on risks help world economies and even private companies perhaps take climate change more seriously. We'll have to leave it there for the time being. Really appreciate your time. Hans Despain, Professor of Economics at Nichols College of Dudley, Massachusetts.